EDUC 6 Assessment Learning 2 Diagnostic Assessment presented by Group 9. It's time to start! Here's are the content. Definition of diagnostic test. Features of a diagnostic assessment. Purpose of diagnostic assessment. Types of diagnostic assessment. Examples and uses of diagnostic assessment. And lastly, advantages and disadvantages of diagnostic assessment.
What is a diagnostic assessment? A diagnostic assessment is a type of pre-evaluation that allows the teacher to discover how much knowledge a student has on a subject matter. In other words, it is used to gauge the level of a student's knowledge and to discover any learning gaps they might have. They happen at the beginning of a learning experience, that is, a unit, lesson, quarter, or period of time. Diagnostic assessments are low-stake assessments because they are non-graded and do not determine whether the student moves to the next educational level. Rather, they show a student's strengths and weaknesses regarding a specific field of study. With this information, the teacher can make any required adjustments to the learning framework to get the most results. What are the features of a diagnostic assessment? To describe an assessment method as diagnostic, it must meet the following criteria. Number 1, a diagnostic assessment must happen at the beginning of a learning experience such as a new semester or lesson unit. Number 2, it should focus on understanding a student's current knowledge base. Number 3, a diagnostic assessment must identify the strengths and areas of improvement for the student. Number 4, it must be non-graded. Number 5, it should establish a baseline to compare what the student knew prior to a lesson and what they learned after in order to measure growth.
Purpose of diagnostic assessment. Diagnostic assessment also benefit the instructor by providing a baseline for teaching. The teacher would know the most important areas to focus on and the topics that should be ignored. You also have the chance to correct any misconceptions before beginning a learning activity. Ultimately, diagnostic assessment make the teaching or learning process more efficient and effective by zeroing in on content that needs to be taught and mastered. It puts the students and teachers on the same page and creates a better learning experience for everyone.
Types of diagnostic assessment. Diagnostic assessment are broadly placed in two categories: informal diagnostic assessment and standardized diagnostic assessment. Informal diagnostic assessment. An informal diagnostic assessment happens spontaneously before a new learning experience begins. For example, the teacher could call up few students and ask them to share what they know about a specific subject. She could also ask students to complete a survey or simple checklist to gather information. When to use informal diagnostic assessment? Informal diagnostic assessment works best when you swiftly need to measure how much students know about a subject. It is fast and allows you to gather information on the go. Standardized diagnostic assessment. A standardized diagnostic assessment uses well-defined testing methods to evaluate a student's knowledge and identify any existing gaps. These assessments provide teachers with a more in-depth analysis of a student's learning weaknesses and strengths. Typically, standardized diagnostic assessment happen after the informal assessments. First, the teacher collects spontaneous data on the student's level of knowledge. Next, they apply a standardized method like curriculum-based testing to determine a student's knowledge level of a specific standard. When to use standardized diagnostic assessment? You should use standardized diagnostic assessment when you need to gather comprehensive information about a student's learning weaknesses and strengths. Examples of diagnostic assessments: surveys and questionnaires. Surveys and questionnaires are some of the most common methods of conducting diagnostic assessments. You can create an online survey, questionnaire, or form plus and administer them at the beginning of your lesson. Alternatively, you may use the email invitation feature to send the survey to students beforehand. Form plus allows you to collate responses seamlessly and interpret them to arrive at the most reliable outcomes. Using this data, you can make any necessary adjustments to your teaching model for better impact. Unit pretest. A unit pretest is a non-grade assessment tool used to determine how much knowledge a student has of the subject. These pretests are commonly made up of fill-in-the-gap questions, multiple choices questions, and other types of closed-ended questions. The whole idea is to test a student's existing knowledge before they get started on a new learning module or unit. When preparing a unit preset, it's best to focus on the core concept and skills that you want students to know at the end of the learning period. Many textbooks and other learning materials have unit presets in different chapters. You can build yours from scratch using a form builder like Form Plus. Checklist. A checklist is a simple tool that outlines specific assessment criteria for diagnostic evaluation. Checklists are highly collaborative, which means the teacher and the students can participate equally in the evaluation process. It also allows for self-evaluation. Teachers score each student based on the different criteria on the list. In the end, they analyze the result and use this to gauge the student's level of knowledge of the subject matter. One of the advantages of using a checklist for assessment, it helps you to streamline the evaluation process and focus on the most important criteria. Curriculum-based measurement. Curriculum-based measurement, or CBM, is a method teachers use to find out how students are progressing in basic academic areas such as math, reading, writing, and spelling. Although it is mostly used in formative evaluation, it also has a place in diagnostic assessments. During curriculum-based testing, the students partake in brief assessments lasting 1 to 5 minutes each. The teacher records their score for each of these tests. After the scores have been recorded, the teacher decides whether to continue instruction in the same way or to change it. Common examples of curriculum-based measurements include: first, dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills; second, grade oral reading test; and third, group mathematics assessment and diagnostic evaluation. Impromptu quiz. As the name suggests, an impromptu quiz is a spontaneous assessment of your students' knowledge. You can conduct this offline or use Form Plus to create and administer an online quiz. In most cases, a quiz has only 10 questions or less. In different formats, you should expect open-ended questions as well as closed-ended questions. Types like multiple choice, fill in the blanks, and true or false questions. If you like, you can switch things up by organizing the impromptu quiz as a class game with rewards for the winners. Entry slips. You can use entry slips to collect quick information from students. Teachers can ask a few questions while students write down their responses on the slips. After the exercise, the teacher retrieves the slips, evaluates the response, and make any required changes to the curriculum.
Advantages of diagnostic assessments. One of the key benefits of a diagnostic assessment is it allows the teacher and student to highlight and address knowledge gaps. When you have a clear idea of a student's level of knowledge, you can restructure your teaching program to address their most pressing challenges. Let's look at some other advantages of conducting diagnostic assessments in the classroom. It helps you to tie learning outcomes to specific goals and objectives. Diagnostic assessments provide substantial data for creating an effective curriculum that improves learning outcomes for students. It makes the teaching and learning process more efficient by zeroing in on content that needs to be taught. It creates a rewarding and amicable learning environment for the teacher and the students. Diagnostic assessments allow the teacher to map out a meaningful and efficient instructional plan for the course duration. It creates a baseline for future assessment. At the end of the course, the teacher can compare students' performance via their level of knowledge at the beginning of the course and record any improvements. The diagnostic assessments allows the teacher to individualize instruction. From the data, you can identify students who need extra tutoring on particular portion of a unit or course of study. In the same vein, if a teacher discovers that a group of students has already mastered a large portion of a unit of study, he can design activities that allow the group to go beyond the standard curriculum for that topic through independent small group study. Limitations and disadvantages of diagnostic assessment. Number 1. Large class size. It's easy to carry out a diagnostic assessment when you are dealing with very few students. However, if you have a large class, it becomes more difficult to conduct this type of assessment. Analyze results and arrive at a realistic conclusion. One way to get past this challenge is using an online form for administering the assessment. With Form Plus, you can create powerful surveys and questionnaires and collect responses fast. Read on to learn more about using Form Plus forms for diagnostic assessments. Number 2. Time consuming. Again, this is a challenge if you're dealing with a large class. In fact, many instructors argue that diagnostic assessments are impractical in large classrooms. Conducting this type of assessment means sacrificing useful time that can be used for teaching and learning. Other challenges you should expect with diagnostic assessments include: Number 3. They generally require special training in order to be administered and scored reliably. Number 4. If the teachers lack commitment, then you wouldn't get the best result from this process. Number 5. Diagnostic assessments can trigger anxiety in students. Number 6. It can lead to false inferences about a child's knowledge or abilities in the classroom.
Thank you for watching!